They say signing divorce papers is the final step, like crossing a finish line, like breathing out after holding it in for too long. But for me, it felt more like collapsing in the middle of the race, like realizing the finish line doesn't exist, just more road, stretching endlessly in front of you. The courthouse smelled like lemon cleaner and old regrets. Plastic chairs lined the walls like soldiers in surrender. The judge was kind but quick, efficient. We were case number 6 on the docket. I don't remember much of what was said, just the rustle of paperwork and the scratch of my pen. My hand didn't shake, not because I was strong, but because I'd already been numb for months. He didn't look at me, not once. Wore the same gray shirt he used to paint the garage in. His silence was louder than any scream. I thought I'd feel free, light, like something heavy had been lifted. Instead, when I stepped outside into the late July heat, the sun felt like it was pushing me down. The concrete wobbled, the sky spun, and then everything went black. It turns out, some endings don't wait for you to walk away. They knock you down where you stand. I came to just long enough to feel the sidewalk scrape my shoulder. There were voices. Someone called my name, but it sounded like they were yelling through water. The light was too bright. My skin felt too tight. And then, his hands. I knew them instantly, not by sight, but by the way they gripped like someone trying to hold on to something already slipping away. "Call someone! She's not okay! Hey, can you hear me? Amanda, can you hear me?" That was his voice. Rick's. The man I'd just divorced 20 minutes ago. The same man who hadn't looked at me once inside the courtroom was now crouched on the courthouse steps, cradling my head, yelling at strangers to do something. I wanted to say, "I'm fine." I wanted to push him away, but my body didn't cooperate. My limbs were lead, and my tongue wouldn't lift. The paramedics arrived fast. I remember flashes, the sharp hiss of oxygen, a woman's fingers checking my pulse, Rick refusing to let go of my hand. They asked if he was family. He said yes before I could answer. I saw the inside of the ambulance ceiling, white and cracked and humming. Rick sat beside me. I felt his knee against mine. That familiar tension in his jaw. He was scared. And I remember thinking, just before everything went dark again, this man who had stopped loving me a long time ago, why did his panic feel real now? Or worse, why did it still matter to me? The hospital room was too quiet. Machines beeped in steady rhythm beside me. The light overhead buzzed faintly, like it was thinking of going out but hadn't decided yet. My body ached in places I hadn't noticed before. Shoulder, ribs, something behind my eyes. Rick was still there, sitting in a chair that looked like it hadn't been kind to anyone in years. His arms crossed, elbows resting on his knees, staring at a stain on the linoleum floor like it might tell him what to do next. Neither of us said anything. When the doctor came in, she was young, calm, the type of calm that makes you nervous. She glanced at her clipboard, then back at me. "Ms. Callahan, your vitals stabilized quickly, but we ran some standard tests just to rule things out. And, well, I imagine this wasn't something you were expecting to hear today." I blinked. "You're pregnant, 11 weeks. I didn't speak. Not because I didn't hear her, but because my mind had stopped processing language altogether, like someone had yanked the plug on my brain. Rick sat up straighter. "What?" The doctor repeated it, gentler this time. "She's pregnant, almost through the first trimester." I turned my head to the wall. There was a crack in the paint that ran like a river across it. I followed it with my eyes to the corner of the room, anywhere but him. I wasn't supposed to be pregnant. That chapter, motherhood, family, him, was closed, taped shut, buried. "You okay?" Rick's voice was low, careful. I nodded once. Or maybe I didn't. I couldn't tell. He leaned forward like he wanted to say more, but then leaned back instead. The silence between us returned, heavier than before. The doctor said something about follow-ups, prenatal care, nutrition. I caught every third word, but none of it stuck. When she left, Rick cleared his throat. "Amanda." I didn't look at him. Was this planned? I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was such a Rick question, strategic, measured, trying to find control in chaos. "No," I said. It was the first word I'd spoken since the steps. He didn't ask anything else, just nodded, like that one word told him everything and nothing all at once. I stayed overnight at the hospital. Routine observation, they said. Rick didn't leave, not even to get coffee. He just sat in that awful chair, quiet as stone. He never was good at silence when it mattered, and now here he was, offering nothing but silence when I didn't know what I needed. I watched him from the corner of my eye as he rubbed his hands together like he was trying to warm them. I used to know what those hands felt like against mine. Now they just looked tired. At some point, he asked if I wanted him to leave. I shook my head. Not because I wanted him there, but because I didn't want to make another decision yet. That night, staring at the ceiling in a darkened room with the faint glow of monitors around me, I asked myself something I never thought I would. What scares me more? Being pregnant. Or having to see him again, every day, because of it? There was no clear answer. I had built my escape from him like a bridge each day, one more plank toward freedom. The papers, the packing, the silence. And just when I reached the other side, life had pulled me back to the middle. Pregnant. 11 weeks. Almost 3 months. It wasn't just about me anymore. And that realization didn't free me. It trapped me in a brand new way. Some endings arrive wearing the face of beginnings, but that doesn't make them any easier to live through. The next morning, I thought he'd be gone. That's what made sense. The papers were signed, the conversation was over, the child was unplanned. But when the nurse came in to check my blood pressure, Rick was still in that same chair, same posture, same silence like he'd never moved. He didn't ask questions, didn't try to talk, just nodded at me when I opened my eyes and stayed exactly where he was. I didn't know what to do with that. When a man leaves you emotionally for 2 years, then refuses to leave physically when you finally break it off. What do you call that? Guilt? Instinct? Habit? He brought me a bottle of water without a word, moved a little slower than I remembered, like something in him was tired too, the kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep. He didn't ask to be part of anything, but he didn't walk away either. There was a time in our marriage when I begged him to stay home more, to notice when I was hurting, to show up. Now he was here, and I wasn't sure I wanted him to be. But I didn't ask him to leave, because when the ground under you shifts, sometimes you hold on to the last familiar thing, even if it's the same thing that once made you fall. I kept my answers short. The nurses asked if I had any food preferences. I told them toast was fine. The doctor came in to talk prenatal care. I nodded but barely listened. And Rick, he just sat there. No lectures, no plans, no we need to talk speeches. He only stood when I needed something, sat when I didn't. It wasn't like him. The Rick I married couldn't sit in a room without trying to control the temperature in it, the thermostat, the blinds, my schedule, my choices. Even the way I organized the spices, it was always a suggestion, but we both knew what it really meant. There was a time I mistook that for love. Back then, he said it was about caring, making sure things were in order, keeping me safe. I believed him, even when it chipped away pieces of me I never got back. But the man sitting across from me now looked smaller. Not in size, in presence. Like someone who had finally realized his grip wasn't holding anything but air. I still didn't trust him. That doesn't just come back because someone brings you a blanket or refills your ice water. But part of me noticed the difference. He didn't try to tell me what to eat. He didn't ask what the doctor said. He just sat there and let me be. That unnerved me more than anything he could have said. Because if he had come in demanding things, being his usual sharp-edged self, I could have justified my walls. But this quiet version of him, I didn't know where to place it. People don't change overnight, and even if they do, doesn't mean they've changed for you. Still, when he asked if I needed anything, and I said no, he nodded like that was enough, and maybe, for the first time in a long time, it actually was. It was late afternoon when he finally spoke. The TV in the room was on low some daytime game show where everyone clapped too hard for nothing. I was half listening, half counting ceiling tiles when Rick cleared his throat. "I know this isn't what you planned," he said. "It's not what I planned either." I didn't respond. He waited, then added, "If you don't want me involved, I won't fight you on it." That made me turn my head. There was no edge in his voice, no hidden threat under soft phrasing. Just a sentence. Straight. Still. Final. And for some reason, that hit harder than any shouting match we'd ever had. I'd expected resistance, negotiation, some version of the Rick I knew, the one who hated feeling powerless and always had a backup plan. But he just sat there, looking at me like he meant every word. I didn't know what to say. A part of me wanted to ask, why not fight? Another part wanted to scream, "Don't you dare leave this on me!" But I didn't say either. I just looked at him and he looked back, and in that quiet standoff, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Restraint. And oddly, a kind of respect. It didn't make me trust him. But it did something else. Something smaller. Slower. It loosened something I didn't know I'd been clenching for months. It wasn't relief. It wasn't reconciliation. It was pause. That was all. But sometimes that's enough to change everything. That night, after they dimmed the hallway lights and the nurses stopped checking in every hour, I stared out the hospital window at the parking lot below. It was empty, except for one beat-up sedan. Rick's. He'd stayed again, still in that same shirt, the same worn boots. Like he didn't know where else to go. Or maybe he did, and just chose not to. I lay there, one hand on my stomach, not out of instinct, but uncertainty. This tiny life inside me, it changed everything, and nothing. I didn't know how to feel. Gratitude that I wasn't alone, resentment that it was him, again, who filled the space, or guilt for not having all the answers. Because the truth is, it wasn't just the pregnancy that scared me. It wasn't even Rick. It was what might happen if I let go of the story I'd built to survive, that he was bad, that I was better off alone, that I could outrun what we used to be. I told myself I left to save myself. And that was true. But now, sitting in this room where everything felt raw again, I wondered if I was also running from something else. Not just fear, but the possibility of wanting him again, of trusting that maybe, just maybe, he'd finally learned how to show up the right way. And if that were true, would I even let myself believe it? I met Rick at a gas station off Highway 12, just outside of Ridgeland. It was the kind of place with one working pump, a flickering Pepsi sign, and a cashier who didn't look up from his crossword. I was on my way to my night shift at the urgent care clinic. Tired. Running late. I pulled in fast and cursed when the nozzle wouldn't click into place. I jiggled it. Nothing. Then came the voice, gravelly, low, with the slightest hint of amusement. "Pump 3's been moody all week. You've got to hold it just right." I looked up. He wore a flannel shirt with grease stains on the cuffs and had a wrench sticking out of his back pocket, like it lived there. His face was lined in the kind of way that made him look like he'd already lived 2 lives before 35. I didn't ask for help, but he came over anyway, showed me the angle, let me try again, nodded when I got it right. He didn't flirt, didn't even ask my name. But when I went inside to pay, he was already at the counter, paid for mine, too. Said, "Don't argue, just pay it forward next time." I didn't argue. I just asked, "You always fix strangers' problems at gas stations?" He shrugged. "Only the ones who look like they haven't slept." We ended up sitting on the curb for 10 minutes, sipping vending machine coffee in paper cups that leaked from the bottom. He told me he worked at a local mechanic shop. Said the town was too quiet for his taste, but the people were good, solid. I remember thinking, this man doesn't feel like a spark. He feels like a blanket in winter. And that felt safer than anything I'd known in a while. The beginning was good. Not perfect, but warm in the way old quilts are. Familiar, reliable, made to hold. Rick didn't say much, but he did things. Fixed my leaky sink without being asked. Picked me up after every double shift with black coffee in silence. He wasn't the poetic type, but when my dad died, he held me in the car for 2 hours without checking his phone once. We moved in together after 6 months. Married a year later at the courthouse, just us and 2 witnesses we barely knew. It felt right. But things that feel right at first don't always stay that way. The change didn't come overnight. It came in suggestions. Like when I was applying for a supervisory position at the clinic and Rick said, "Do you really want to work more hours? I can pick up extra shifts at the shop. You don't have to prove anything." It sounded like care, until it didn't. When I bought a red dress for my friend's engagement party, he raised an eyebrow and said, "That's a lot of leg. Where's the rest of it?" He laughed after, said he was joking, but the dress stayed in the closet. And eventually, so did I. There was never yelling. Rick didn't scream. He didn't slam doors. He didn't curse. He just steered things, one nudge at a time. "Maybe you don't need to drive all the way to your sister's this weekend." "That friend from work seems a little intense, don't you think? I just don't want people thinking I don't take care of you." None of it sounded cruel. None of it came with fists. But it came often, and quietly, and always in ways that made me question if I was being unreasonable. So I started saying no less, started asking before making plans, started shrinking until I could fit neatly between the lines of what Rick considered love. It's hard to notice when love turns into control because it doesn't yell. It whispers, and by the time you hear it clearly, you're already halfway gone. I turned down the nursing program in Baton Rouge because Rick said he didn't want to do distance. He didn't forbid it, didn't raise his voice. He just said, "I can't sleep without you here. We'd fall apart." And I believed him. Because when someone says they need you, you mistake it for love, especially when you've spent years trying to be needed. I told myself it was fine. I could always reapply, do something local. But local never came. Over time, my world got smaller. I stopped seeing friends unless Rick was in the mood to tag along, stopped going on weekend trips to visit my sister because the truck's been acting up, or we could use that gas money for groceries. He always wrapped it in logic, in care, and I wanted to believe he meant well. He didn't yell, he didn't insult, he just adjusted the world around us until it only made sense if I stood still inside it. I didn't feel trapped, not at first. I felt chosen, like staying home meant I mattered, like giving up parts of myself meant I was doing partnership right. But one day, I woke up and realized I hadn't made a single decision on my own in over a year. Not what to wear, not where to go, not who I was. It wasn't dramatic. There was no big argument, no slammed door. Just the quiet, sinking feeling that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being a person in this marriage and started being a piece of furniture he could point to and say, "See? I take care of her." But I wasn't being cared for. I was being kept. The morning I left wasn't stormy. No thunder, no slammed doors, no suitcase flung into the back seat. It was just Tuesday. Cool air, quiet house, coffee brewing on a timer like it always did. Rick was still asleep. I watched him for a second from the hallway, his chest rising steady, one arm tossed across the empty side of the bed like he still expected me to be there. I'd packed the night before, quietly, one drawer at a time, just the essentials. I didn't take the wedding photo, didn't leave a note. I didn't owe one, because this wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was preservation. I walked out wearing jeans, a sweatshirt, and the version of myself I hadn't worn in years. No one saw me. No one stopped me. And as I pulled onto the highway, my hands on the wheel steady for the first time in months, one thought kept circling in my head. I didn't leave Rick. I left the version of me that couldn't breathe near him anymore. And I never looked back. The day after they discharged me, Rick offered to drive me home. I let him. Not because I wanted to, but because getting into a car with him felt easier than standing on a sidewalk trying to explain why I wouldn't. He didn't say much on the ride, just tapped the steering wheel with one hand, eyes fixed on the road like the yellow lines might give him the answers I wouldn't. When we pulled up to my apartment building, I sat for a second before opening the door. Then I turned to him, finally said what I'd been holding in since the hospital. "This doesn't mean anything's changed between us," I said. "I'm pregnant, yes, but that's not some magic pass that gets you back into my life." He nodded slowly, said nothing, but his eyes, those damn eyes, didn't agree. They lingered. They hoped. They searched for cracks in my voice that I was careful not to leave. I held the door handle tighter. "I don't know what this will look like," I added. "But whatever it is, it'll be on my terms. Not yours. Not like before. Rick exhaled through his nose, like someone accepting the losing hand in a game he didn't know he was playing. I get it, he said. I almost believed him. But when I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, heart thudding like I'd just run a mile, I realized something. He might say he understood, but some part of him still thought he could find his way back in, and that part wasn't going to stop quietly. Rick didn't knock often. He'd leave things on my front step like some kind of reluctant ghost. One morning, it was a carton of orange juice and a box of saltine crackers. Another, it was prenatal vitamins and a sticky note with "no iron in this one." They said it might sit better. The handwriting was still the same sharp, all caps, like he was afraid of curves. He never waited around to be thanked. He didn't ask for updates. He just left things. Showed up when he thought it mattered, then disappeared again. And strangely, that mattered more than any apology he could have spoken. When my next appointment came around, I stood in my doorway with the keys in my hand, looking out at the sidewalk, debating if I should drive myself. Rick pulled up without texting. I should have been annoyed. Instead, I climbed into the truck and said nothing. He nodded, adjusted the air vents, and drove like we were just two people sharing a direction. At the clinic, he didn't hover. He waited in the corner of the room, hands folded, eyes on the wall art like it was more important than the ultrasound machine. When the nurse turned the screen so I could see the flicker of a heartbeat, he didn't say a word, but I saw his jaw go tight. Saw him blink like his body didn't know how to process what his heart had just registered. On the drive home, I expected questions, proposals, ideas for baby names. He said nothing. He dropped me off, nodded again, and drove away. And for the first time, I felt something between us shift, not in a dramatic, tidal wave kind of way, but like a river carving out new paths one quiet drop at a time. He wasn't fixing things. He wasn't asking to be forgiven. He was just showing up. And somehow, that did more damage to my walls than any speech could. It was sitting in a small brown box on my porch one morning, tucked beneath a folded dish towel like he thought cushioning it might soften the memory. I knew what it was before I opened it. The silver bracelet, the one he gave me on our 2nd anniversary. Simple, thin, with a clasp that always stuck. I used to wear it every day until the day I didn't. That day, I left it on the dresser next to a stack of bills I paid alone. But now it was back. Only this time, it had a new charm hanging from it. Small, gold. A single letter, J. Not for me, not for him, but for the baby. For whoever they were going to be. No note, no explanation, just the bracelet, and the letter, and the silence. I stood in the kitchen, turning it over in my hand, thumb brushing the smooth edge of the charm. It didn't feel like a gift. It didn't feel like a manipulation either. It felt like something else entirely, an offering. A question with no words attached, a version of him that said, I see you, and I see what's coming, even if I don't know where I belong in it yet. I placed the bracelet in my top drawer, next to an ultrasound photo and a bundle of appointment cards I kept forgetting to use. I didn't wear it, but I didn't throw it away. Because some things aren't meant to be decided all at once. Some things sit quietly in drawers, waiting for you to decide if they still fit. There were moments, little ones, like when I'd catch myself looking at the porch around the same time each morning, wondering if something would be waiting, or when I heard his truck down the block and paused, just long enough to pretend I didn't care. I told myself it was habit, muscle memory, not hope, because hope was dangerous. Hope made you forgive too quickly. It made you rewrite old pain into softer versions just to survive. But still, there was something. In the quiet way he moved now, the careful way he gave space without acting like it hurt him, the way he didn't say, "Let's fix this," but instead asked if I needed more crackers. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't romantic, but it was real, and part of me, deep down, in the part I'd been keeping locked since the day I left, wondered if maybe he was changing, or worse, if maybe he already had. But every time that thought surfaced, I shoved it back down with equal force. Because change doesn't erase damage, and a kind gesture doesn't unmake control, and letting someone back in doesn't mean they won't leave the same scars again, just in a different shape. So I didn't let myself believe. Not yet. But I couldn't deny it anymore either. Something was happening, and I was terrified it might be real. It happened outside the pharmacy on 8th Street. I'd just picked up a refill for my prenatal vitamins when I heard my name. "Hey, Maggie?" I turned and saw Drew Sanderson, an old co-worker from my days at the clinic. He looked exactly the same. Soft eyes, button-down shirt too big for his frame, always smelling faintly of cedar and hospital-grade soap. We hadn't spoken in over a year, not since I left the job, not since the divorce. But there was no awkwardness. Just two people who'd once shared take-out lunches and bad jokes during overnight shifts. We talked for less than 10 minutes. He asked how I was doing. I gave the polite version. He asked about the baby. I said I was managing. He didn't pry. He never did. When he reached out to give me a half hug, more of a shoulder pat, really, I accepted it. Grateful even, for a moment of familiar kindness. And that's when I saw Rick's truck, parked at the corner. Engine still running, his hands gripping the wheel like it was the only thing keeping him in the seat. Our eyes met. His jaw was tight. And just like that, I knew. Whatever patience he'd built these past weeks, whatever silence he'd learned to live inside, it cracked. Because Rick didn't see Drew. He saw a threat. He saw the version of me that had once laughed freely, stood taller, maybe even flirted back. He didn't see a memory. He saw competition. And Rick never liked to lose. He didn't say anything right away. I crossed the street, brown paper bag in one hand, stomach already tight, not from the baby, but from the tension rising with each step toward the truck. Rick stared ahead as I opened the passenger door and got in. The silence was sharp, almost sterile. He waited until I buckled my seatbelt, then finally spoke. "You still talk to him?" No name, no emotion. Just that flat, cold voice I hadn't heard in months, but had never quite forgotten. "Drew?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "I ran into him by chance. We caught up, that's all." He didn't respond right away. His eyes stayed on the windshield, but his fingers tightened around the wheel like he was trying to crush it in place. "Funny," he said. "You always said there was nothing going on with him. Guess I was just supposed to take your word for it." I turned to look at him. "You were," I said, "because I never gave you a reason not to." He let out a short laugh, not joyful, not even bitter, just sharp. "You're right. You were always careful, weren't you?" That did it. Something snapped in me, not loud, but clean, like a rope going taut and then giving way. "This isn't about Drew," I said. This is about you not being able to handle the idea that I might have a life outside of you. Still. His head turned toward me now. Finally. Those eyes I thought had softened were back to what they used to be, calculating, guarded, looking for something to use. "I'm just saying," he said. "You don't exactly have the best judgment when it comes to men." It was meant as a jab, a subtle one, but it landed like a punch. I stared at him, and in that moment, it wasn't about the pregnancy, or Drew, or the bracelet in my drawer. It was about the truth I didn't want to face. Rick could change his habits. But that didn't mean he'd changed his reflexes. I didn't yell, didn't raise my voice or fling accusations like I might have done years ago. I just looked at him, long enough for the weight of my silence to register. Then I said, clear and even, "I didn't come back into your life to be doubted all over again." Rick blinked, like he hadn't expected that tone from me, calm but final. The kind of tone that doesn't need volume to cut deep. "I'm not doubting you," he said quickly, but his voice was already folding in on itself. "You are," I said. "You're doing it in that way you always used to. Quiet, calculated, disguised as concern." He turned toward me fully now, one hand off the wheel, mouth half open to defend himself, but I didn't let him. "You don't get to question who I talk to, not anymore. You lost that right when you stopped trusting me the first time." He leaned back slowly, jaw tight. I wasn't angry. I was just done. Not with the baby. Not even necessarily with him, but with the version of us that lived under a microscope his. He stayed silent for the rest of the drive. And so did I. But somewhere between the pharmacy and my front porch, something that had started to thaw inside me began to freeze again. Because now I knew. Whatever progress Rick had made, it wasn't finished. And I wasn't going to be the one who waited around for him to get it right. Not this time. When we pulled up to my building, I didn't wait for him to park. I opened the door, stepped out, and closed it behind me with a softness that somehow felt louder than a slam. Rick stayed in the truck. Didn't call after me. Didn't ask me to stop. But I knew he was watching, because that's what he always did. Observed, calculated, waited for his moment. Only this time, there wouldn't be one. I walked up the steps slower than usual, not because I was tired, though I was, but because I wanted to feel every inch of the space between us. When I reached my door, I turned the key, stepped inside, and let it close behind me without looking back. I didn't say goodbye. Not even a take care. Because this wasn't a goodbye. It was a boundary. One I should have drawn years ago. He sat out there for a few more minutes. I watched his shadow from the peephole, unmoving. Then, finally, the engine started, and the truck rolled away. No screeching tires, no fists on the dashboard. Just silence. The kind that isn't peaceful. The kind that makes you wonder if someone finally understood something, or just gave up trying. Either way, I didn't chase after him, because I wasn't angry. I was just empty. And that, somehow, was worse. My phone lit up in the dark with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it ring. But something about that hour, 3:07 a.m., told me this wasn't a wrong number. "This is St. Luke's Medical Center. Is this Rick Carlson?" I sat up so fast I knocked the phone off the nightstand. My heart started hammering before I even picked it back up. "Yes. What is it?" "There's been a complication. Maggie Callahan was brought in by ambulance. She asked for you when she arrived but lost consciousness shortly after. We need you here. I didn't even hang up properly. Didn't brush my teeth. Didn't put on socks. Just keys, wallet, phone go. The streets were dead silent, like the whole world was asleep and I was the only one left awake to carry this panic. I ran every red light between my place and the hospital. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped the wheel. And the whole time, one thought played on repeat in my head. Please. Please let her and the baby be okay. I don't care what she thinks of me. I don't care if she never lets me back in. Just don't let this be how it ends. I pulled into the emergency lot like I'd done it before. And maybe, in some way I had. Not this hospital. Not this night. But I'd been here before, helpless, desperate, hoping I hadn't ruined something beyond repair. Only this time, it wasn't about guilt. It was about love. The kind that doesn't ask for anything in return, just begs for one more chance to show up. Alive. The waiting room looked like every other waiting room, overlit, too cold, and humming with the sound of machines you're not supposed to notice until they stop. A nurse finally called my name, and I was taken into a small consultation room with beige walls and a ticking clock that seemed louder than it had any right to be. The doctor looked young, competent, but tired. His scrubs were wrinkled. His expression wasn't hopeful or grim. It was neutral, professional, the kind that knows how to deliver devastating news without letting it show. "Mr. Carlson," he began, "Maggie was brought in with signs of placental abruption. The situation is serious. We're preparing for emergency surgery now." I nodded, too fast. "Okay, so what do you need from me?" He hesitated. "There's a possibility, if things go wrong, that we'll have to prioritize one life over the other. The baby is under distress. Maggie's vitals are unstable." I stared at him. "I need you to understand," he continued. "This is worst-case scenario, but if it comes to that, we need to know what her wishes would be." I couldn't speak, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I knew it too well. A few weeks back, she'd said it like an afterthought, barely above a whisper, while thumbing through a baby name book at the kitchen table. "If it ever came down to it," she said, "I'd choose the baby. No question. I wouldn't even hesitate." At the time, I hated that sentence. It felt like another wall going up between us. But now, sitting here, faced with a doctor asking me to decide who lives if the worst happens, it was the only clarity I had. I looked him in the eye, voice barely steady. "Do everything you can," I said. "But if it comes down to it, save the baby." The doctor nodded. No judgment, just action. He turned and left, and I sat there alone, the clock still ticking, praying I'd never have to find out what that kind of choice feels like when it becomes real. They tell you love means doing what's best for the other person, but no one ever says how much it's going to break you. I sat alone in that cold little room, the fluorescent lights buzzing like they were mocking me. Somewhere behind those doors, Maggie was fighting for her life, and so was our child. I'd always been the guy with the answers, the plans, always knew the next move, always had a strategy. But none of that mattered here. No amount of money, no clever line, no grand apology could rewrite what was happening now. I had two options. Neither of them involved me walking out whole. The baby or her. And the truth? I wanted her. God, I wanted her more than I'd ever admitted. Even at our worst, even when she walked away, even when I let her, I never stopped feeling like some part of me still belonged to her. But that wasn't the choice I could make, because I remembered her hands cradling her stomach like it held the universe, the way she whispered to it at night when she thought I wasn't listening, the soft smile when she felt it kick for the first time. "This baby is everything," she'd said once, half asleep, head on my chest. "I don't care what happens to me. Just make sure he's okay." And I hated her for saying that, but I understood it now. So when the doctor looked me in the eye and asked if I was sure, I didn't flinch. "Yes," I said. "Save the baby." Not because it was what I wanted, but because it was what she would have wanted. And for the first time in my life, loving Maggie meant letting go of what I wanted most. Her. I sat back down after that, elbows on knees, hands clasped so tight my knuckles went white. And for the first time in years, I prayed. Not for a miracle, but for peace with the consequences of loving someone more than myself. The doors to the operating room swung shut with a hiss. No drama, no slamming, just a quiet click, like the sound of something inevitable locking into place. I sat alone in the hallway outside. No nurses hovering, no one offering updates, just me and a chair too hard for comfort. I didn't pray, not because I didn't believe in anything, but because I didn't think I had the right to ask for anything anymore. I had made my choice. Now I had to live with it. My hands rested on my thighs, palms up, empty, still. I didn't scroll my phone, didn't pace, didn't cry. I just sat there in that awful stillness, listening to the hum of the vents, the beeping monitors somewhere behind the walls, and my own breathing trying not to break. I didn't think about the future. I didn't imagine names, or birthdays, or soft newborn cries. All I could hold on to was this moment, this waiting, as if the universe was weighing me silently, and hadn't yet decided if I deserved mercy. A nurse finally came out and called my name. Her scrubs were speckled with something, maybe sweat, maybe someone else's blood. Her voice was soft, but it landed like thunder. "She's out of surgery. The baby, too. They're both alive." I stood up too fast. The hallway tilted, or maybe it was just my knees giving out for a second. Alive. That should have been enough to make me weep, fall to the ground, thank the stars or whatever gods were listening. But instead, I just nodded, like I couldn't trust joy yet, like it might disappear if I reached for it too quickly. They let me see her a few hours later. Maggie was pale, eyelids fluttering like she wasn't fully here yet, tubes in her arms, machines humming beside her. And there, in the little plastic crib next to her, was Lucas. Tiny, swaddled, breathing, alive. She opened her eyes when I walked in. Just barely. I didn't speak. I didn't dare. Then she looked at me, not with fear, not even with gratitude, but with something heavier. As if trying to understand who I was now. As if she didn't quite recognize me anymore. I didn't blame her. We had both walked through something we couldn't explain. We had both lost pieces of ourselves in the process. And while we came back with breath in our lungs, there was a stillness between us that didn't exist before. No words of comfort. No thank you for saving him. No reaching for my hand. Just a quiet acknowledgement in her eyes. We made it. But we are not the same. And maybe we never would be. I came every day after that. To the hospital first, then to her apartment once they discharged her and Lucas. I never asked if I could come. She never asked me to, but I came anyway. I didn't bring flowers, didn't try to make speeches. I just came in quietly, picked up what needed to be done, and did it. Diaper changes, formula bottles, late-night cries. I learned to move through her space without taking it over. There were days Maggie didn't say much. Sometimes she just nodded toward the baby when he stirred, and I took it as my cue. I never touched her, never tried. Even when she'd fall asleep on the couch, completely spent, her hair a mess, her face worn, something in me ached to reach out, to just put a hand on her shoulder and tell her she didn't have to do it alone. But I didn't. Not unless she asked. Because this time, I wasn't here to win her back. I was here to earn the right to stay close. And I knew better now. Control never looked like cruelty with me. It looked like good intentions. Protection. But it was still control. So I showed her with action that I was different, that I could show up without taking over. Each morning, I made coffee and left it on the counter for her. No note, no expectation. I folded laundry without a word, took Lucas for stroller walks when she needed to rest, and when I left, I always waited for her to say goodbye. Sometimes she did. Sometimes she didn't. But I never lingered. She needed space. And for the first time in my life, I understood that space wasn't rejection. It was trust on trial. So I loved her quietly, with clean bottles, with warm burp cloths, with silence. Not because I expected her to love me back, but because she had already taught me what love really looks like. There was a moment. It wasn't big. It wasn't dramatic. I was standing in the kitchen, hair tied up in a rush, Lucas fussing in the bassinet. I was running on 2 hours of sleep and half a slice of toast. Rick was washing bottles. He didn't say a word. Didn't ask if I was okay. Didn't offer advice or make a suggestion. He just kept rinsing, one by one, careful, like he was handling glass sculptures instead of plastic. And I don't know what hit me harder, the fact that he was here, or the fact that he wasn't trying to make me see him anymore. He wasn't performing. He wasn't waiting for credit. He was just there. And in that stillness, something inside me shifted. For so long, Rick had always been the center of the room. The voice, the energy, the pressure. But now, he was quiet enough that I could hear myself again. I turned my head to look at him. Just look. His back was to me. He didn't even notice. And that was the moment I knew. He had changed. Maybe not completely. Maybe not forever. But enough for me to believe that this time, if I reached back, he wouldn't grab. He'd just hold. Lucas was fussing again. That late afternoon kind of cry-tired, not hungry, just needing to be held. I bent down to pick him up, but Rick was already there, reaching for the same tiny body. For a second, our hands touched, just barely on the soft fabric of the baby blanket. It was a small thing, a touch that once would have meant nothing. But now, it lingered. Not because we held on, but because neither of us pulled away. I glanced up, and he was already looking at me, not searching, not hoping, just seeing. His eyes didn't ask for forgiveness. Mine didn't offer any. But for once, we didn't turn away. We stood there, sharing the weight of our son and maybe something more. Not romance, not reconciliation. Just a shared truth between two people who had lost too much and still chose to stay standing, That moment didn't change everything, but it was the first that didn't ask for distance. And for now, that was enough. It had been raining since sundown. Not a storm, just that quiet, persistent kind of rain that soaks the world without making a sound. Lucas had finally fallen asleep after his usual bedtime fussing. Rick was putting away dishes while I stood by the living room window, arms crossed, forehead resting on the glass. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Maybe nothing. Maybe something I wasn't brave enough to name yet. Rick walked in a few minutes later, drying his hands with a kitchen towel. "I'll head out before it gets worse," he said, already reaching for his jacket from the armrest. I turned around slowly, looked at him. Really looked. His eyes didn't carry hope anymore. They carried respect, caution, a kind of quiet endurance I'd never seen in him before. And maybe it was the sound of the rain, or the smell of Lucas's baby lotion still lingering in the air. Or maybe it was just time. I spoke before I could talk myself out of it. "Stay." Just that. One word. No soft preface. No explanation. Rick froze, jacket half on. He looked at me like he needed to be sure. I didn't say it again. I didn't need to. The difference was in my voice. This wasn't pity, or loneliness, or obligation. It was choice. And he knew it. He let the jacket slide back onto the couch and nodded once. He didn't smile, didn't make a joke, just took a seat quietly on the other side of the room, as if he knew even now, even here, space still mattered. And maybe that was why it felt safe to let him stay, not because he asked, but because finally he didn't have to. Lucas was asleep again. The rain had softened into a hush outside, just barely tapping against the windows like it, too, had settled in for the night. I walked into the living room with 2 mugs of chamomile tea. Rick looked up from the couch, surprised, like even now he wasn't sure where the lines were. I handed him a mug, sat down beside him, not close, not far. We sat like that for a while. Quiet. No TV, no talking. Just the kind of silence that didn't feel awkward anymore. And then I turned to him. Not on purpose. Just instinct. Maybe it was the way the lamp lit only half his face, softening the edges I used to fear. Maybe it was the way he looked back steady, not intense. But I leaned in, just slightly, and he met me there. Our lips touched like it wasn't the first time, but it wasn't like the old times either. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't even about love. Not yet. It was about presence. About saying, "I see you. I trust this moment. I'm still here." When we pulled away, we didn't say anything. There was nothing to explain. No promises, no regret. Just a quiet understanding. This wasn't a return. It was a beginning. The sun came through the window in soft strips. It wasn't warm yet, but the sky was finally clear after a long night of rain. Lucas woke first, as usual, those tiny grunts and stretches he made just before opening his eyes. I picked him up before he had time to cry and walked into the kitchen. Rick was already there, barefoot, sleeves rolled, rinsing dishes in the sink. He looked over his shoulder when I entered. Just a glance. No words. Then he went back to the plates. Lucas gurgled. Rick smiled. Not the kind of smile that asks for anything, the kind that just happens when your heart settles. I sat at the table, watching the two of them in that quiet, steady rhythm. No declarations, no apologies, No need to ask what we were. The answer was there. In the clink of ceramic, in the hum of morning, in the sound of my son laughing at the way his father made bubbles with the soap. We hadn't said we were together. We hadn't said we were starting over. But the coffee was already brewing, the crib was still in the corner, and Rick didn't need permission to pour 2 cups. Sometimes the words come later, and sometimes they're not needed at all. People always talk about second chances like they're magic. Like the moment someone walks back into your life, everything resets and you just go back to what you had. But it doesn't work like that. Not if you're honest. Rick and I didn't fall back in love. There was no big gesture, no dramatic reunion, no music swelling in the background. What happened between us wasn't about going back. It was about choosing. Choosing to listen when we used to interrupt. Choosing to wait when we used to push. Choosing silence over fixing, presence over promises. And some days, it still feels fragile. There are mornings when I look at him holding Lucas, and I feel both peace and fear, because I know what we were, and I know what we almost lost. But then he hands me coffee without a word, changes the baby without being asked, and doesn't reach for me unless I reach first. And I remember, love isn't something that happens to you. It's something you show up for. So, no, this isn't the same love we had before. It's quieter, stronger, rooted in the version of ourselves we became after breaking. We didn't fall in love again. We stood still in it, together. And this time, we're doing it right.